This conference will now be recorded.
Right, perfect. And I think if anyone on the right hand side, certainly my screen, I've got a plus and a minus to increase the size if anyone wants to increase the size of and zoom in to the screen if anyone wants to make that any bigger at all.
Stephen,
Okay,
just to let you know, we can see your next slide. I think you need to change it rather from presenter's view. I think the display settings up at the top, if you, there we go. It's the top one, sorry, there we go, perfect. Thank you so much.
Thankfully, you've got a professional on the call tonight, Stephen. Thanks, Kate. Cheers.
Okay, hopefully I've got lots of names and things down the side. Hopefully you can't see those, is that correct?
You could probably take them off, I think, Stephen, if you wanted.
That kicks me out. We'll find out in a second. Oh, don't do that.
Or just put the person thing above it, the two people above it with 41 next to it. That should take that off, I think.
It's okay, Russell. We can see the screen clean.
All right, cool.
All right, is it just administrators that can see it like this? Is that fine? Okay.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay, we've jumped on to the second slide, which the first one was just a coverall. I'm just warn, I guess I've already lost my connection twice tonight, despite telling my daughters not to go and watch anything on the internet. So I'll hopefully spot if I lose that again, and apologies if I do. Thank you very much for the introduction, Russell. Just for background, this is an update and a revised version of a presentation that Martin really talked us into, that we gave internally to the Network Rail Technical Authority, actually about 2/3 of the way through the recovery works. So I've tried to add some additional information to capture the end of the works, and I've also added a couple of videos, etc. I think they may have caused some of my problems, so I think I'll just switch my camera off just now, if that's okay. Hopefully that'll solve any technical problems. So the topic is Whitecross recovery works, so Edinburgh Glasgow main line recovery works. I'm not managing to flip through this yet. There we go. I can't see the slide, which is not helping.
The slide is up.
Yeah, we've got the slide here. Okay.
Yeah, but I've still got lots of stuff in front of it, though.
Right. What can you see just now, Stephen, in front?
I've now got a box of lots of names. I'm trying to get rid of.
Okay. Right.
Stephen, if you just put your cursor on that, you can move it to the bottom, or you can move it to the side, and you can shrink it as well.
Okay, can I not get rid of that so I can actually see on the screen though?
If you tab round, you can.
We did have a trial run.
So
not in sufficient detail.
If you press that, the people up the top being next to 41 twice, does that not take it away? It does with myself anyway, but I don't know if that would work with yourself, Stephen. You know the little picture of the two people at the top. If I press that, it goes and comes away at the top of the screen.
No, it just changes the.
It moves it to the side, doesn't it?
Changes it to us, yeah.
And does it? Can you shrink that at all? Or that can you just try to think?
I've shrunk the view to 50%, Stephen, and I.
This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, sorry about that little technical inconvenience. So we go back to early morning of the 12th of August. Very unfortunate day for the railway in Scotland. As many of you will remember, obviously there was a significant storm event which cut across the country and impacted various elements of infrastructure throughout the country. Lightning strikes certainly in the Pullman and Whitecross area were significant. Several properties were hit, and there was a significant amount of rain, something like 80 millimeters over 4 or 5 hours, which subsequently was advised to be, I believe, a 1 in 240-year storm, which is obviously a fair return period. The impact it had on the Union Canal was quite drastic, and I'll let, hopefully, Scottish Canal's Director of Infrastructure explain that for us.
Good afternoon. We've had a really challenging day here in Lithgow. Overnight we saw an incredible amount of rain, up to about 40 millimetres in an hour, hitting this area of the Union Canal. And unfortunately we have seen a breach reported to us about 8 o'clock in the morning, and we were out here within 45 minutes to have a look at it and see what we can do. We've taken actions across the canal. We've put sandbags at either end of this area of the breach, and we've managed to stop the flow. We are making significant progress, but this is a very challenging situation. The water that is flowing out of here is heading down across a number of fields and down onto the Edinburgh-Glasgow railway, where there is significant damage. So this has very much been a partnership approach between Transport Scotland, Scottish Canals, Network Rail and the police, and we are dealing with this issue. But I have to say the team have been absolutely fantastic out here, working with our team Mackenzie's. We're getting on top of this situation, but it is going to take us time to support to get it repaired. It's probably looking at least 3 to 4 months and a considerable amount of investment. And it just shows the challenge that exists on our canals, 200 years old. We've been investing through the asset management strategy. We've been working on the embankments of the Union Canal near the towns and the villages. And here we are with an incredible storm last night and a breach on the canal. So we will keep you informed as this develops, but I can tell you that we're doing everything that we possibly can to resolve this issue as fast as we can, and we will keep the whole team and our customers informed of the situation.
Hopefully I'm back onto the presentation.
All good, yeah, all good, Stephen, thanks.
Yep, thank you. So the area there, this is an aerial shot to describe the location. You can see Whitecross, a village between Pullman and Linlithgow, on the top right of the slide. Your Avonside Parish Church and grounds, cemetery there, and the canal running across towards the bottom corner of the slide, and the breach point circled. The breach point was on the outside bend of the canal and on probably the highest point of the canal embankment there. So, you know, as track and civil engineers, we tend to know in the railway that these points are always weaknesses, and that really is what occurred on the canal. So you can see the old brickworks area, which is pretty semi-derelict currently. And then a wooded area which runs between the breach point, heading north down to the main Edinburgh-Glasgow line. And you can see marked on there the kind of extent of the flooding. This is the kind of scale of what happened. So the canal breach, there was literally thousands of gallons of water swamped into that area I showed. In through the woods that you can see in the back of the photograph, and then there was a sort of berm arrangement and an undulating topography running adjacent to the railway cutting, and as it crossed that, it brought material and significant earth into the railway cutting, along with the massive volume of water. And you can see the impact it had. As I was talking about with the canal, it basically filled up the railway cutting in that section, which is almost 1 kilometre long, and looked for the weak spot at the end where the cutting changes onto an embankment slope and eroded away from there. So we ended up with a 300-metre long washout, from that transition point. Just another example of the volume of water. This is looking from up closer to the railway, back across the fields. That's basically the River Forth is across the hill there, Bowness and the River Forth, and you can see all the farmers' fields were absolutely inundated with the canal water. So looking at the site, slightly more zoomed in, you've got the sort of triangular wooded area, which reached the main cutting, which basically starts from the main A801 road bridge, which is the Lethallen roundabout to Bathgate road bridge, for those that know the area. And the cutting runs from there for the best part of a kilometre before it goes on to an embankment section on the approach to Bowness Junction. And you just see Overbridge 50 there at the bottom of the slide. Again, some photographs. One of the odd, shall we say, opportunities on site is that you can see these poles. So there was actually some trial slope monitoring systems installed on this particular section of the Edinburgh-Glasgow main line. They didn't actually particularly trigger because the water basically washed across the top of it rather than coming through or undermining those slopes, which had previously been recognised as being fairly mediocre slopes, I guess would be the term. But it does have the opportunity, that monitoring system has a webcam facility, which is where we had the opportunity to get these photographs. So you can see in the top left photograph, the water coming along and basically had started pouring out in the first photograph into the deep, almost 9 metres high hole that it created, and was gradually working its way back westwards along the edge of the interface between the railway embankment in the distance and the railway cutting where this picture is taken from. At the other end, this is the other monitoring site. You can just see an accommodation bridge, possibly just cut off in the photograph there, and the level of water. These photographs were taken by mid-afternoon, I think. And you can see the volume of water was obviously significantly less. Once the plug hole had formed at the far end, at the east end of the railway cutting, the water was charging out from the railway, but had caused significant damage on its way. A couple of helicopter shots as well, again just demonstrating the look of the railway. It became a second canal, which is very much an article in the Rail Engineer magazine from September, October last year, if you want to pick up on the history and consideration of canals. It's got a good article by David Shiras. The inflow came in over the downline cutting from the adjacent woodland, flooded the area and brought pockets of material primarily onto the downline. That was really, the pockets were formed, I think, because of the kind of lateral undulations in the slope along the downline to the south of the tracks. A couple of more photographs of that, just the kind of material that came in, and demonstration that people were activated, while obviously the canal people spoke about being notified at 8 o'clock in the morning. I think the original notification to Network Rail was somewhere near 5:20 in the morning, when the first train coming through for the start of service notified water coming in and becoming above rail level, which then tripped the track circuits and eventually tripped the overhead line, as you'll see the reason for that shortly. Looking at the split of site, this is what the previous slide was the centre section, so what I'll refer to as Site 2. The next section is Site 3, so that's along at the main Bathgate Road Bridge, just at the bottom of the slide here. You can see the traffic photographed from our helicopter, and you can see where the water ingress has eaten itself in underneath the downline. So you can see the exposed sticks there. And similarly, round about the overhead line masts. So that became another design issue that would need to be picked up. So moving into a summary at that point, certainly I became allocated and involved in the washout by about late afternoon, 1600 on the 12th. Attended site to meet some of the asset team and representatives from the geotechnical contractor, QTS. They were actually they'd been on site, had a look, and they were probably saying they were going to go away and start making arrangements. But definitely when I arrived, they recommended going and having a first-hand look, and just the scale of what had occurred and the sort of wipeout of the railway cutting was quite incredible. So how do we deal with it? What did we decide to do? Obviously, we started to pull together the right people that we could action. Bearing in mind, this was the 12th of August. Obviously, by this stage, we all knew there had been a significant derailment up near Stonehaven. I think to a certain degree, a lot of people had a level of shock to do with that. But we had to look at the problem we were presented with and start considering how to address that. So the key things we moved forward with, not necessarily all immediately on that day, but in the next few days as we pulled together a plan, was scoped by the work with joint walkouts with the Network Rail Route Asset Management teams. Obviously geotechnical, they were first to really come out once the power and the signalling teams had notified control and we knew what was going on. Then the other disciplines, obviously track, overhead line, UP, signalling, and including the telecoms from a other apparatus perspective. The logic that we looked at was, rather than previously considering this initial response as being a geotechnical problem, and we realized that this was a system problem, and that we really needed to get all the best available resource dedicated to it. So we sourced the existing term contractors and engaged them and utilised the suitably qualified and experienced people, including the design teams that would support the contractors. So that in reality was QTS, the Rail Systems Alliance, and SPL for the overhead line system. Early realisation of the scale, we knew we weren't going to be finished by the weekend. So we looked at it and we thought, right, we really need to formalise things, use the correct process, consider what we needed to get in place, safety piece it, get some design information, get the records, make sure that we knew what we were dealing with and properly come together a plan to reinstate. Backed up by that, there was a corporate decision, a Scotland's Railway decision to improve the resilience. Build back better was the phrases that came out and continue to be considered in many ways at the moment. Initial programme guesstimate, 8 to 10 weeks was where we started thinking about it. So talking about the different sites, site 1, so that was the main failure point. This is looking a helicopter shot looking towards the west. So you can see the water sitting up the top there in the railway cutting. It then came down off the side of the downline and created its own ditch and its own route out of the railway cutting and down the embankment slope, eating in to, as I said before, about 9-metre depth in this area here. So that was termed as being the main slip site, site number 1, and it was 300 or so yards long in real work terms. QTS were engaged and activated to manage that area. They did a great job setting up site, dealing with all the various apparatus and infrastructure and landowner access. These sites always have farmers that are looking for every penny they can achieve. So the reconstruction work ended up using somewhere on the order of 9,000 tonnes, a combination of 6B rock and 6F5 granular fill material to recreate the embankment itself, and obviously the formation and subbase to the new tracks. This was the detail. Covey are the designers who are on the framework with QTS. So they attended site pretty much round the clock for the initial period and produced recommendations, obviously to do the clearance work initially, get down to a robust material, and then to work with the fill material back up. So you can see the difference in material shown there. That's the 6B rock fill at the bottom, and then the 6F5, and because you've got the separation eventually on the deepest part of the washout, was between the up and the down roads. Obviously one of the big concerns is any kind of settlement acting across the sticks, so we did try to put a benching detail in there, but with having drainage and service routes balanced fairly precariously along the edge there, they had to be fairly short. So that certainly was something of an issue later on when we considered reopening and TSR speeds. At the other end of the works, so beyond the Bathgate Road, obviously the scale of work there was significantly less. There was an overhead line mast, which is unfortunately just behind this photograph, which needed to be investigated and then filled round about to create support. And then the embankment was more traditionally benched at roughly 45 degrees to come outside the track support zone. And again, a rock drainage layer put into the very wet area in the bottom of the adjacent field, and allowed the embankment to be built back strongly enough to support the profile and the cess. As ever, overhead cables, so additional safety concerns adjacent. So I'll probably move on now, hand over to site 2, which is the centre kilometre or so of the work site, and the main railway reinstatement, which Martin will run us through.
Okay, next slide.
Here we go.
Yep. So the Rail System Alliance got involved quite early on, but this was probably the Monday after the Wednesday that we had our first joint walkout with the asset managers to agree the specifications for the track renewal. We'd already been, the loss adjuster had already agreed that all the areas that had been affected by the flood were to be renewed. So that cleared a lot of the dubiety whether we try and reuse material or whether we go and just put new material in. The track on the downline, which is on the left-hand side of the photograph, we renewed that 5 years ago along with the drainage in this area. So that was initially thought was, do we try and salvage that and reuse it? And the decision was taken that that would be taken off site and recycled back at Carlisle. Next slide. So this is the on site 1. This is the site compound being constructed. So this was the initial access point. So we had access points at site 1 and site 3, and then we set up another compound at Parliament Yard to access the sites for rail access and storage of material. The first priority was to get on site 3, the previous photograph that was shown, some of the ballast had been washed out. So the priority was to get that infilled so we could start bringing road rail machines in by the upline, because the upline was less affected than the downline. A lot of the washout had occurred on the downline from the embankment on site 2. So that was the next priority. And then whilst all this was going on, You'll see in that photograph there on site 1. What we had to do there was we burnt the rail in either side of that to then allow QTS, it was SPL, to come and remove the overhead line equipment and make that safe. And then the track was chopped up into short 3-meter segments, and we had a machine in the bottom of the hole there lifting out to a road railer that you can just see at the top of the photograph. And that took that area, the 200 meters area of site 1, we stripped all the track out of there to enable QTS to then have a clear site to start doing their recovery works on. In the meantime, while this was going on, we were surveying and getting an ASC design produced ahead of us starting to do the track recovery works, or track renewal works on site 2. Next slide. This basically shows a little bit more of the issue we had on site 2. A lot of the embankment on the downcess had probably had previous ballast riddlings from previous reballasting jobs, I think, chucked up on the embankment there, because a lot of that stuff that washed down was sort of ash-like and looked like former ballast riddlings. So all that had to be cleared away. Next, prior to that, I should have added that there was S&T troughing on the bottom of the embankment. You can just see in the left-hand side photograph, but there was also cabling at the top of the embankment as well, and that was all tangled up. That was fibre optic cables as well as signalling cables, and that was tangled up with the vegetation that had washed down in trees and such like. So the priority there, we had to then run out for fibre optic cables, temporary new cabling to enable us to cut the old cables and start doing the recoveries for the embankment works. So that was all done, and we had to work out, because it was a third-party fibre optic cable. So we were given a window of about 3 hours one Saturday morning, early hours, to get that reconnected before we could cut the old cable. There was additionally, you can see in that photograph at the right-hand side, that's the drainage where the drain from the downcess drain crossed over to the upcess, and that's the water actually followed the original drainage scheme there. So we had drainage recovery works to do on site 2, and then site 1 was done by QTS. Next slide. So that photograph there is the first loco in, and we had that top and tail, so we had a loco at both ends, and we had 3 trains available to us working at a 24-hour cycle. So as one was loaded up, we'd have another one going back to Carlisle to get reloaded, and then bringing new materials back in to enable the whole process to run for a 24-hour service. So the first priority, once we got the track away, as you can see in that photograph there on the downline, was then to do the rough digging and clearing of the vegetation off on site 2. Next slide. So this is the first pass with the rough digging. You can see the white spray paint as the earthwork engineers have been examining the embankment and assessing it prior to it being regraded. Right, next slide. So, so this is a little bit further on now. So the embankment's now being graded off, and we're now preparing to do the actual track renewal on the downline. So that's just mentioning the rough digging there. So that's about 4,000 tons of material was removed. Next slide. So this is just looking back at site 1 again. So you can see now that the infill is going great there now. So you're probably down to about 2 meters now. So they've already put over 7 meters of material in there, and that was allowing us to continue on with the recovery of the upline then on site 2. Next slide. So this is commencing the dig now. So this was a 300mm dig with geotextile and TED4 union and G44 sleepers and Sen60 rail. Next slide. So we'd agreed at the start that we were initially going to open at a 15 mile an hour handback speed. So we worked on the basis we're going to do 3 passes with the whacker plates, because there was a bit of debate whether we're going to go for a higher speed handback or not, but we'll come back to that later in the presentation. But at this early on, we had agreed that it was going to be a 50, so that's what we designed and did the consolidation for. Next slide. This is commencing now of the relay in the sleepers. So this is using the spider handling system. So this takes out 7 sleepers at a time, and the handling tool, or spider as it's called, spaces your sleepers and drops them in position. So you can see that there's a white spray paint marker on the left-hand photograph. That's so the operator can then line up the sleepers. It places them in position for relaying. Next slide. So this is now looking at site 2. We're getting very close now to getting to the final formation level. We'd agreed with QTS that they were going to profile the sub base with a correct crossfall for us. So all we would have to do was relay our geotextile on it and ballast up. And they were also going to install the track drainage, but there was about 150 meters missing at that location as well. The next slide. So this is now the formation ready. QTS have just completed their works, and now this is just us preparing to start relaying on the downline, the upline, to try and join the 2 sections of railway together, and then we're going to relay from the downline from the upline. So the next slide. This is a new bit of kit that we'd only just started using. This was the second time we'd used it, and the first time we'd ever used it for dropping ballast. These are the MFS wagons, sorry. It was originally bought for a high output relaying system, and as a result of the cutbacks, there was surplus wagons available. So these wagons are now available for use for normal track renewals rather than high output track renewals. And 2 of these wagons were converted into track machines. Initially, they were designed for S&C, and the intention was that they could be used for both excavating and bringing material to site where you've taken all the track out, so you don't normally have any other means to relay from one road to the other. We used it very successfully for excavating on the site at Devil's Bridge in between Inverness and Dingwall about 2 weeks before this photograph was taken, and that was the first time we'd used them. But on that location, we were using them to load into and transfer the material into the train, rather than, on this case, we were using them to offload. But it's a very, very efficient system. It drops about 40 tons of stone in literally 3 or 4 minutes, and it travels very quickly. So it runs backwards and forwards to the train and reloads from the wagons that are on the track already. We'll go on to the next slide.
Okay, Martin, just to say I've got that video ready on the next slide if you're good to go with that.
Yeah, so this is the video of this machine working now. It's quite loud, so I'll probably just let you watch the video and, and maybe
be prepared to tune your volumes down. Yeah. Assuming it works, of course.
Right. Yes.
Okay, Martin.
So, yep. Yeah. So that's so you see there the photographs of offloading the ballast there. Now I should say there was 2 wagons that have got tracked machines. There was one, you may have seen it in the corner of the photograph, that was just at the end of the shot of the last shot. Unfortunately, one of the wagons we were unable to get to work. It physically was able to move around, but we just couldn't get it to offload the ballast. It was showing a systems fault on it. Unfortunately, you'll see later on that there's another story to go with that. So I'll just go on to the next slide now. So right, this is further along now. We've done the relay. This was the next day after. So we've put the ballast in, and we've got the upline now opened, and we're just about to start doing the relay, preparing the track now to relay the downline. But we're doing that conventionally from the upline as we normally do track renewal. So next slide. So along with the track works, SPL, they did all the OLE work. There was 2 masts that they had to recover, and we worked throughout this job. I should have added that this was a Babcock track design. We had the Cowie doing the earthworks, and SPL doing the overhead line design. So we had like 3 separate design teams, all working under separate contracts, but everybody worked together, and it was a fantastic collaborative working, and it was a real good example of what people can do when it really matters. So we'll go on to the next slide. So part of the works, we'd agreed to DTS the track just to improve the reduce the amount of time it's going to, because we were going to have the speed restriction on. So the view was that we would be able to reduce the length of the speed restriction if we got site 2 DTS, and that would only require the speed restriction over the site 1 area where the deeper dig occurred. So we used throughout this, we used a geotrolley for measuring track position, and it was like 3D control for all the lasers and dozers and all the on plant machinery, and for the tamping. So everything was all coordinated very accurately, because normal practice of using one line as a datum rail, because both lines were effectively floating lines, this was a much better system to use. Next slide. As well as the track works, there was quite a significant amount of S&T work to be done, apart from just new cabling routes, new cabling in. Location boxes all had to be renewed because they'd been under floodwater up to about 1 metre height. So all that equipment all had to be replaced and renewed and tested prior to the work being completed. Next slide.
Okay, I think I'll step back in. Thank you very much, Martin.
Yep.
So going on from that, just to update things, as ever with a large project, as this turned out to be, on Thursday the 3rd of September, we had a highfalutin VIP visitors, as you can see listed there, who certainly appreciated, I think, the efforts and the work, and there was a lot of good commentary came from that. As ever, though, there was a bit of a challenge. At that stage, we were working to a completion date of the 28th of September. They challenged us to push ahead and see what we could do to improve that. And we were basically pushed into doing the 21st of September. The consequence of that, I think, as you've seen from the photographs, a lot of the heavy civils had progressed well. Obviously, the track renewal had gone in, but it did cause issues with the logic that we started off on, particularly relating to the signalling equipment, about trying to build back better. You know, making decisions to renew cables, renew boxes, where a normal emergency response would just be to use maintenance perspectives and put things back together as quickly as possible, was a little undermined at that stage, and it just meant that there was ongoing rules of route work following the entry into service of the reinstated railway. So that was a political and a corporate decision at that point to bring things forward. Various out with the direct works, and there was various minor earthwork slips and bits and pieces where the storm had caused other damage. You can see where the next burn along from the end, the site 3 end, had overtopped as well. So it was a case of clearing that area out and reinstating S&T back into its proper trough routes. We did try, and should have perhaps put in a photograph of the completed work there, but we did actually take the parapet off and put all the cables into a single route to try and aid that in the long term. So running back to a previous slide and updating it, in summary, how were the work scoped and designed, particularly addressing hazards and improving the resilience. So as I said before, joint walkouts, using the existing term contractors and the qualified and experienced people to do the works. An early realization of the scale, making sure that we carried everything out with all the right records. As Martin talked about in one of his slides, design work was properly surveyed and fully carried out, you know, in a time scale of a few days. And I think we ended up with a signed off permanent wave Form B 6 or 12 hours in advance of it actually being implemented on the ground. So, you know, things were certainly done very promptly. Looking back, one of the key early PM decisions, I think, were in consultation with our health, safety and quality environmental team, was to split the site into 3. It gave the 2 principal contractors, QTS and the Rail Systems Alliance, the opportunity to geographically be separated. And then that allowed, obviously, under our CDM responsibilities to be met by those 2 principal contractors. Building back better, the resilience, so we improved the earthwork robustness. I've seen various questions just popping up on the screen. There were things done to improve the drainage. We did go with design slopes. You obviously saw the earlier details for the site 1 and site 3. We put in complete new overhead line, or SPL put in complete new overhead line foundations, and drove the standard circular piles in for those, and put new masts on them, twin track cantilever masts to try and avoid a repetition of the loss of the masts that were on the outside of the bend at the transition between the railway cutting and the embankment. So should, obviously perhaps something we'll talk about afterwards, but should a significant flood event occur there again, we would hope the consequences would be reduced. That really is part of that Build Back Better. The other thing, as Martin mentioned, location cabinets renewed. We relocated them for some reason, obviously lost through history. The location cabinet was 300 or so meters away from the block joint that it was actually connected to. So again, to try and improve that, we put the new one in a closer location and rationalised, as I mentioned, the troughing throughout the centre part of the site, so that rather than having to find and maintain cables that were in a trough route both in the cess and at the top of embankment, it was all in a new contained cess trough. Hazard management, obviously the track condition for plant access, so that we had to make sure that we checked the plant on the way up from the access points, particularly from Polmont Yard. The earthwork condition underneath, making sure that we had an understanding of what damage the water may or may not have done, and in relation to softening up the formation. What was going on in the adjacent ground, whether or not there was going to be more water. So we had quite a lot of liaison with Scottish Canals, backwards and forwards, making sure that their temporary dams were robust enough that they were controlling any further risk from there. Condition of cables, obviously, as ever, telecoms cables, for example, can have an impact on station announcements or signalling systems many miles from any particular location. So we still had to treat a lot of the cables as live, even though we knew they had been disconnected locally. But it's very much the case that you do that to ensure that you avoid impacting the operational railway out with the extents of the site. Something came up. There was a request to run an electric service into Linlithgow from Edinburgh, while obviously the Linlithgow to Polmont section was still blocked by the works. But the feed system for the overhead line came from towards Greenhill feeder station, and it could be resupplied from over on the Bathgate branch, but that was a little more technically problematic than it was expected to be, and took up a fair bit of involvement from both Network Rail asset teams and some assistance from SPL and the Network Rail Capital Delivery project teams. Access and fencing at the site compound. Obviously, we were still in the midst of COVID-19, so I'm sure you've seen masks on a lot of people in the photographs. There was a lot of additional space created. A lot of meetings took place standing outside rather than in cabins. Round about the compounds, there was Scottish Power overhead line, which was visible in the photographs, but there were also buried high pressure major gas pipes and INEOS oil pipelines, which caused a little bit of a headache towards the end of the project. Risk management, obviously I mentioned before, PSIP, scope confirmation, survey and design. I think from a project management point of view, Mark Wilson, Network Rail project manager on the geotechnical framework, stepped up and took the lead role from that point of view. And I think in reality, Network Rail Capital Delivery, we were the principal designers, so that really rested on my shoulders. As Martin said, there was a lot of bodies involved, different design organisations, so we did spend a lot of time on conference calls and ensuring that information was being passed focally through Mark and myself to try and make sure that everything went as smoothly as possible. We concluded the project as it really became through an EIS light process, to the infrastructure manager and a formal taking over certificate, which I've certainly got to say the Rail Systems Alliance Scotland are much more practiced in than perhaps the geotechnical frameworks. So that was an interesting learning opportunity. I've thrown in a couple of slides at the end with some completion photographs, just to run through those. So that's the Site 1 area. You can see the grass already coming back up on the slope reinstatement. So that was really where, from the distance there, that's where the water had eaten in along the toe of the cess of the upline. I think I might have got my lines mixed up earlier, but I'll go with that. And just looking there, obviously reconfiguring on the new twin track cantilever that was installed. And this was a drainage connection. So we tried to put in new drainage in the sort of valley that was created between the cutting slope and the cess shoulder, and continued that down through the farmers' fields to tie into the original outfall point, but as far away from the railway as we could achieve. At Site 2 and Site 3, obviously that was a photograph of the machine, the MRS that Martin referred to. You can see some of the new signalling equipment and the troughing route running across in here. This is very much at the end where we interfaced from the end of Site 2. So you can see the redundant or the older section of troughing that was going up the embankment, and we achieved a new trough over the 600 or 800 meters along the bottom there. Down at Site 3, you can see all that graded out and rock fill to create an embankment and replace the affected area around the overhead line mast, and new fencing, and returning the field back to the landowner. One of the things that we were looking at picking up is in the, I think Martin mentioned it, but in the permanent way design, the overbridge that you can see in the distance was actually tight clearance from Egypt, electrical clearance wise. So the design was able to achieve an additional 100 mil there, which has allowed for the removal of the tamping restriction through that particular stretch. I'll try my luck with a couple of videos. So we ended up test trains on the evening of Sunday the 20th of September. As you can see in that footage, it's a little darker. And then a handback on Monday the 21st for opening of service. As Martin referred to, handback speed, we eventually agreed on 60 miles an hour. There was quite a lot of challenge to the initial figures. The embankment designers were keen to go with 40 mile an hour initially, and obviously the Rail Systems Alliance Scotland are capable of opening back up to a much higher line speed, 80 or 90 miles an hour. But in this scenario, because of the risk of settlement of 9 meter deep localized embankment, particularly on a cross track stepped detail, after a bit of consideration and consulting various other experienced engineers around the country, we agreed on a fairly significant monitoring arrangement and a handback speed of 60 mile an hour, which, looking back at the monitoring results, certainly we were comfortable with. The monitoring results were pretty consistent. There was some global settlement, but there was very little twist fault created. So it's good from that perspective. I'll just try and run these couple of videos. This is the first train on the download. As you can see, a bit dusty. And a cab ride on the first train on the upline. Onto the Site 3, crossing through there, you can see the speed boards underneath the Bathgate Road Bridge. running along through Site 2. See new drainage covers, Site 2 embankment works, and heading towards Site 1. Just approaching the slope there and over Site 1 without flinching. So, almost towards the end. I think as Martin mentioned, not everything went ideally to plan. So a certain, was it MFS wagon, Martin, correct me?
Yes, yeah, this was the second wagon that we just could not get to operate, or we couldn't get it to offload. And because of where it was in the formation of the train, we were given really no option but to walk the failed wagon off the site, which we took down. Unfortunately, it was next to the site haul road that we used for the construction of Site 1. So that's one good thing about this sort of kit. At least you can take it off in the road mode, if you want to call it that, because we were unable to connect it back onto the train. Again, it wasn't a straightforward case of taking it down the site haul road, because I think, as Stephen said, there was a high pressure gas main that crossed the site haul road that had a 23-ton axle load restriction on it, and this wagon that alone was contained 40 ton of stone plus the weight of the wagon as well, so well in excess of that. So before we could do anything, we had to get the material off the wagon. As I say, this is a brand new piece of kit. I think it was the second time we'd used it in Scotland. This is a very sophisticated piece of equipment, shall I say. It's made in Switzerland, and it has monitors and every conceivable type of computer software and everything else on this machine. And the only thing we didn't do on the night was actually switch the machine off and let it reboot up. And had we done so, the fault cleared, because it was just a system fault on the sensors, I think, and it self-cleared once it was rebooted. So it's like everything new. Once you learn these things, you can go forward. We used this equipment at Christmas very recently, successfully at the renewal at Cathcart's Circle, and it works brilliantly. So it's like everything, you learn as you go along. So that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Martin. Just a couple of final points there. We heard a lessons learned review with various representatives of the parties, and certainly I think the collaboration was very much key, but there were, as ever, different views on what was good and not quite so good, and some things to take forward from that. On that basis, there is an opportunity there, we believe, to feed in some of these things about combined system working, and what design and control mechanisms you need in place for multidiscipline projects, which will be feeding into the current ongoing Network Rail project pace or speed, as some of you may have heard of. Final bit, another video from my friends at Scottish Canals to give an update post-Christmas as to how they're progressing. Obviously, we completed their works in 40 days, I think, was roundabout time in terms of entry into service and reopening. Obviously, there was ongoing signalling work to complete, but the canal is a much longer project. Hoping I've got the correct link.
Here we are at the Union Canal Muir side embankment beach location, which occurred in August 2020. And following the initial mitigation and containment of the escaping water from the canal, we very quickly moved into a phase with our framework contractors and designers to start looking at how we could reconstruct a robust reinstatement and reconstruction of the embankment to secure it for the future. We are actually standing on the bed of the canal, which is being used as a temporary haul road, and you will see that we have some piles going in. These are 7-metre piles, and these will help protect the embankment where we've got localised failure. We've got 10-metre piles to go in further up where the canal actually breached, and at the moment we are importing clay and filling that area up. Obviously, we'd like to say thanks to the Scottish Government for over £6 million in funding, which not only will deal and treat this breach location, but also the Union Canal corridor, looking at flood and resilience measures for these 200-year-old assets. Programme-wise, we're looking for a spring 2021 completion, and that is both for navigation and for the towpath.
Thank you very much. I think that's Martin and I done.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Martin and Stephen. A brilliant presentation. Just to remind people before we go into the questions, if you have a question, if you could pop it into the chat box, which is this, if you just click the speech bubble, that should pop up. Type into there, and I will ask the questions. At the end of the written questions, we've got a handful of questions now. At the end, we'll do a kind of open mic in case anyone's phoning in rather than doing it on a PC, etc. So if I could start the questions, please. The first question is from Tom Wilson, our Vice President for the PWI. So I've noticed some of the questions you've kind of answered in your presentations as you go along, guys, but we could just run through them anyway. That'd be great. The first question was the likelihood of a canal breach in the area ever considered by Network Rail as part of a contingency planning exercise? Not too sure if you were aware of anything like that at all, guys.
My understanding is not at that location, because I think looking at the aerial photography, etc., the canal in theory was relatively far away from the railway. There are points where the canal's a lot closer, and it's certainly been considered in these areas, and there had been dialogue about the canal and their inspection regimes.
And Martin, from a Linlithgow point of view, you probably really recall the last time or one of the times when the canal popped before, albeit I don't think it directly affected the railway, but so it's quite a local thing. There has been breaches in the past, obviously, if you recall some of them.
Yeah, I noticed that they have been doing, well, last year, prior to this, they've been doing work on the section between Linlithgow and Phillipston. They've been putting sheet piling in there, so they must have already identified some areas of risk, and that's the area where the canal's actually above the railway at that location.
Sure. Thanks, Martin. Next question again with Tom asking about the timing of it, and indeed if Network Rail would have been alerted to the danger if the empty coaching stock driver had not raised the alarm. So I think you did mention about track circuits, Stephen. There was the track circuits had been activated, as well. But any thoughts on that at all?
So yeah, I think that obviously it's a bit of a debate. One of the issues I mentioned is the fact there was remote monitoring trial sites on the on two sections of the slopes, which didn't really pick anything up because those particular sections of earth didn't move. So I think the fact that it was picked up by a train before the track circuit went is certainly something that is being looked at nationally, I think, in the resilience planning to understand how we can monitor that. And I know certainly since, obviously since August the 12th, events like Whitecross, but probably more primarily Carmont, there is an awful lot more helicopter usage and drone and photography usage to try and monitor the various parts of the infrastructure.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, and we all know the phrase climate change, and it's a particularly hot potato in railways just now. You know, as with the many other industries, but and the effect of that we're seeing on an everyday basis now. Thank you. A question from Mark Taylor, our secretary. Has the water path now been defined and accommodated for potential future breaches? So quite a tricky one, I suppose, to know where you do protect and what you don't, or that. But yeah,
it was something that we discussed during the design phase. Unfortunately, to try and design for that volume of water would never really have been practical. We would basically have had to build another canal between the railway and the existing canal. So if one canal bursts, it goes into the next canal.
Sure.
I think that the frequency and likelihood of that is not, if you built that for a mile or 2 miles, then the likelihood is the canal bursts another 300 yards past that mile. So I think from that point of view, no, we haven't really done that. In terms of Mark's question about a water path, it was only a water path because the canal breached. There was no real normal water leakage there. So that there is a couple of adjacent water courses, but they were already quite well managed out with that site. So a very unusual scenario. And I think the focus is certainly, as the Scottish Canals, George McBurney mentioned, is that they've had a significant increase in funding from Transport Scotland to look at their own asset resilience and their own asset management techniques.
Sure, thanks, Stephen. And I suppose that the next question from Tom Wilson about Site 3 in particular, about swales or positive interceptor drainage installed to future-proof the area for less excessive pluvia flows. But looking back to that photograph of the fields in the low-lying area, and there was several Olympic swimming pools filled up there, and I suppose that's how you kind of manage that, as you say. If you're near enough building a parallel canal or something to try and manage that, albeit maybe in the localized areas it's slightly easier, but it's on what scale you do that, I suppose.
Yeah, I think again it's just an update to asset policies and a recognition of trying to spend, putting more budget into drainage. I'm sure we'll all appreciate that what budget there's going to be available going forward after pandemic will be more focused on certainly drainage and earthworks. But it's still a prioritisation effort like anything, and I can't really see that this particular location would be prioritised otherwise. If the canal had not burst, then it was actually a really pretty decent bit of E&G.
Sure, yeah. Okay, give you a little break for a minute, Stephen. You've been bombarded with questions. There's a few tricky ones for Martin, but so a question from Mark Taylor. And if anyone else is still on the call has got a question, please just type that in, or we'll open the mics at the end, type of thing. So back to Mark's question. Is that a ballast plough that he was asking to class 66? So
the sleeper, the buffer stop, should I say? The buffer stop.
I'm glad it wasn't going any further forward. Absolutely, yeah. Well, you don't want to end up in the hole, really, do you? Yeah. No. So a question from Tom Wilson again. Sites 1 and 2. Historic ballast cleaning spoil to the cut and embankment slope activities we all know about. How much of a problem might this cause in the future if this spoil is not fully bound? And is Network Rail aware of the extent of this potential problem? So you've been around a lot in the infrastructure, Martin, and you've seen it being put to bank and stopped and that. But any thoughts on this, the bigger picture with that?
I was going to put that back to Stephen, really, because
okay. So the P-ways caused the problem. How are you going to deal with it, Stephen?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. As you probably think you may have mentioned earlier, I worked almost primarily on the GeoTech framework as SPE for 5 years. A lot of the sites that were coming out of the slope inspection sites were found to contain a great deal of that material, as you say, not compacted, not bound in, but basically just thrown onto slopes. And it has been problematic. And certainly the 2 trial sites that I mentioned on here, I think they were there because there had been evidence picked up in the inspection regimes of bits of creeping movement, and that was really from that placed material. So it's something that is quite well known about. I know certainly, I'm not sure how much it has been passed on to the renewals world, but certainly on a multidiscipline scheme, if we are doing embankment works or stuff, then we're very much, we need to go and asset manage properly and get agreement to placing materials. If we put any material, spoil material, because obviously it's still a temptation, particularly if you're working on a site that's several miles from an access point. You don't want to be sending road railers running backwards and forwards to get rid of material. But we have to go through a much more risk considered assessment to ensure that we can find somewhere that has a natural hollow or something. Again, avoiding drainage, avoiding environmental issues to be able to remove spoil. So we do end up disposing of new spoil to tips more often, I think. And we know that it's an ongoing problem. Do we have a map of them and them all listed? I'm pretty sure that the Railway doesn't have that.
Okay, and kind of from a wider systems point of view, Martin, so Stephen's got his kind of experience in that. Is that something we generally, hopefully, don't see very often now? You know, having to
we don't put material.
Don't plan it anyway, yeah.
Yeah, or if we do, it's with the agreement of where we're going to do it, but it's very rare that we would leave anything on site now.
Sure.
It all goes away, and we've got new handling, like the system I showed you there. We've got the equipment now. We can take stuff away from site, so it's not there's no real excuse for not doing it.
Sure, thanks, Martin. Another question with Tom about site 2 in particular, just to dig. And Tom was asking about, you know, the free draining nature of the subgrade or not, particularly. Just asking about the crossflow and, you know, the track drainage. Was that something that you were able to kind of manage the water there? Or?
Yeah, the actual photograph I had, that wasn't at the full dig depth there. There was another about 150 mil to go on there. The sub base was actually very good. It was a sort of quite a granular material, and there was the existing drain that drains that we'd installed 5 years ago. So the whole thing tied in, so it had a crossflow, went at the crossflow to the drain. So but on both cesses, so that was part of the renewal process itself.
Sure, a very good answer, Martin. Yeah.
Just to say, I think possibly at that point when the removal was ongoing, there had been obviously loss of the drainage system, and obviously several feet deep of water in that area, so there was a lot of saturation. We did get the drainage back up and running, and we ended up having to pump that out away from site because the outfall location was where we were trying to reinstate site 1. So I think from that point of view, the cess drainage that was there had to get cleaned out after the inundation, and we had to set up the pumps and all that. So it took a while to kind of lower and get rid of all the water that had saturated into the formation.
Sure, thanks both. Yeah, it's a much more reassuring answer than when I asked that similar question many years ago, and the answer was, it's only like that when it rains. So, so that sounds a lot more reassuring, gents. The next question, another one with Tom about the relay itself. Were the track components, the rail, sleeper and ballast, diverted from the domestic renewals programme to this emergency work? So, do you know where, Martin, where you were able to get that material so quickly? You know, the
well, what we did do was we kept our weekend working. We did our renewals at the weekend, and we did this work during the week. So we were able to keep both our domestic work bank going and do this additional work as well. And at the weekends when we weren't working there, the site was handed back to QTS to
So they were able to go and do a lot of their works that they couldn't do when we had the trains on the site, working on the site. So it worked quite well that way. So yeah, the material rails and sleepers we did get. Because we had midweek access, we were able to get the CWR train and sleepers and ballast brought forward from planned renewals, but without affecting the current renewal plan. So it actually worked very well.
Excellent. And another quick question for Tom, and I think we got an answer to quite a bit of this in the video about the repair bill, basically how it was funded type of thing. So certainly you said that the insurance authority was quite satisfied that we could do the replacement work in early on, and indeed the Canals Authority had quite a significant uplift in their budget to repair and this section in particular. Is that quite that probably answers, I think, most of that. Was there anything else you wanted to add at all?
I think the video bit was about repairing the canal. The funding for Network Rail was certainly a bit more debated. We did have Adrian Murray and myself toured around insurance loss adjusters on a couple of occasions to see obviously the state of the place at the beginning, and then to see the repair works late on. So they were certainly aware of all that, exactly how that worked relative to claiming against Scottish Canals. There was quite a lot of discussion on that front, because at the end of the day, both bodies are funded by Transport Scotland. So I think that there was ongoing discussion there within the asset world and our financial gurus as to exactly how that would be covered. But my belief is the insurers somehow or other have stumped up the majority of the cash.
Okay, excellent. A comment and a question by David Shiris, who thanks you both for a great presentation, and thanks Stephen for the help with the Rail Engineer feature. He says, I understand the Scottish Canals are to fill the canal at the end of the month. Did Network Rail have any involvement in approving the design of the canal reinstatement at all? Was there any involvement by Network Rail, or was that independent?
That would be through the asset team, so I don't have an answer to that one off the cuff. Certainly there was promises of ongoing dialogue, as I mentioned. We were George McBurney, the gentleman in the video, and obviously Richard, the director, were having conversations with Alan Ross, I believe, within Network Rail, and at that sort of level. So I would need to go and ask other people for the answer to that one.
Excellent, thank you. A quick question from Stuart Colvin. Who says, an excellent summary of the challenges faced, gents. Thanks for the presentation. He was getting a bit distracted by a young person in the audience, so very challenging for all of us, some days working from home. How is the site looking now under load? He was asking, after that period of consolidation. So it was a kind of 9 metre excavation, etc. And Martin, you might know the answer to this about the TRU, the PLPR, NMT, etc. output. The monitoring of that, and are there more sophisticated monitoring regimes in place to determine for a determined period of time? So from a track point of view, first before we're going to civils, was there any feedback you guys were getting from a track point of view? For track quality and consolidation.
Again, these are just our standard track quality monitoring systems, like we use them in all our renewals. Again, it's not triggered any values that it's maintained its track quality. We did a lot of consolidation with DTS and tamping DTS as well as the normal whackers, plus what Stephen had said, the settlement on site 1 wasn't significant.
Sure. Was the DTS availability because of the high output kind of downturn slightly as well, or is that something you're using on sort of domestic renewals more often nowadays, Martin?
Yeah, it's quite regularly used on domestic renewals now.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Sure. And Stephen, now from a sort of geotech sort of style wider monitoring regime, you talked about some of the stuff that was going on, and again the sort of feedback from that.
Yeah. So over the site one, obviously I had myself and the designers had concerns about that from a twist fault perspective, but certainly with the design, the depth of the material, where it had washed out to was pretty solid material down at the bottom, and the reinstatement had the large scale rock, a 3B rock type in the bottom for a drainage layer, and then there was a great deal of compaction. Martin obviously showed a photograph of the triple whackers for the PUA compaction, but in that area, you maybe saw in one of the photographs, it was two big double rollers that were used consistently on pretty small layers coming up. I think we were down at some point 150 mil layers that they were putting in, rolling them with the big rollers, and doing regular plate tests under the supervision of the Kobe site engineers. So we pounded the hell out of it and made sure it was pretty solid. The expectation was, with the design and with the materials underneath it, that any settlement would be very short term. So that's why we had the speed on only for a couple of weeks, and we had 3 meter monitoring, remotely targeted monitoring, which was getting read round the clock pretty much, and that basically showed almost pretty much as predicted settlement. I think somewhere on the order of 4 mil total global settlement at track level over site one. So it's pretty impressive.
Pretty impressive, yeah. A 9 meter hole, yeah, absolutely, yeah, excellent. A quick question from Andrew Thornton. Thank you for an excellent presentation. And I was asking about how the work was financed. I think we've probably covered that. If there's any other issues, Andrew, that you wanted to know on top of that, just drop a little note. Gordon, a similar question, I suppose about liability though in this respect. Scottish Waterways kind of canal has burst and it has damaged the rail infrastructure, you know. And we've got our own insurance, but was there any ever, I know this is kind of engineering based and should be quite rightly, but any ever thought of Scottish Waterways would have any liability, or is that something you guys didn't get involved in, just here to kind of do the engineering work, etc.?
I was involved not necessarily with the political discussion, but with the touring around of the loss adjusters, who even engaged a forensic engineer, interesting title, to look at the water courses round about the canal and to try and map out and understand what had gone wrong. So I think there was definitely enough of investigation to understand, to try and look at the root causes of why it breached. And I think from that point of view, that, you know, going back to the 1 in 240 year storm event, it really was an overtopping event that led to a bit of a surge wave going along the canal. That's how it was described to me, that caused the breach. And I don't think there was really any resulting consideration that there was any lack of appropriate asset management. So from that point of view, I think it went to the insurers, and sure. Obviously Transport Scotland have put additional funding in to try and improve that asset management capability, because, you know, Scottish Canals, I don't remember the exact number, but their funding on an annual basis compared with Network Rail's funding is absolutely tiny.
Okay.
So it's interesting to note from that point of view.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Just a comment from Stephen Long, just thanking you both for an excellent presentation there. A note from my page has jumped up there. Malcolm Swan, thanking you again for a great presentation. And he's asking, what can other project teams learn about the team approach taken to managing the risk in the context of scoping, recovering, building and designing simultaneously? I know you covered quite a bit of that at the end, but any other kind of comments from both Stephen and Martin on that, what you've learned, you know, in that team approach to managing these different aspects?
I think it's probably easier from a track point of view, because we were working under, we were still working under our alliance
contractor arrangement. So that was quite easy. Once we'd been given the go-ahead, yes, go and do this, we were able to get on with the role we were doing. And then it was just the case of how we managed interface, because the first week, QTS was a principal contractor. And then once we brought trains onto the site, it was then agreed that the Rail System Alliance would be a better place to be the principal contractor, because they were used to managing, you know, trains and such like on site and more complex sites. So that arrangement was just agreed very quickly, and it switched on a regular basis, like at the weekends. And I think everybody really worked well together. I don't know whether it was just the right combination of people, project managers having these regular calls, daily calls, and everything being discussed, because problems that would normally have halted a project in previous experiences when I've worked on other sites and other things were resolved very quickly, and nobody was sort of saying, "Oh, we can't do anything now until you give me this information or that information. We're just going to wait until we get it." It was like, "Well, what do you need? We'll get you that," and we all work together to the next problem. So Stephen went to it.
Yeah, I think there is certainly that. As mentioned before, I've worked on a couple of derailment recovery sites in the past that have been much more single discipline. And on those, there was an awful lot of when's it going to be done, push and pressure just to move on with things and get a reinstatement done. The message here was, you know, I think because it was different to a certain degree, you know, we knew the scale of it. We knew it was multidiscipline. There was overhead line masts down, the signalling needed sorted out, etc. So there was a general expectation and a good understanding that it would take a certain amount of time, and it needed a systems approach to do that. I think also, you know, it needed a bit of central focus. And I mentioned Mark Wilson earlier on, who was PM. You know, he did a lot of good work on that. Within was, you know, really my first real exposure to dealing with the Rail Systems Alliance, and I was very impressed with the individuals there. You know, I think they knew their day job, they applied their day job thinking to it, and it left Mark and I just to try and manage any gaps and differences between the day job that they were doing and combining that in with the kind of emergency nature and the other disciplines working around about it. But there were there were some certain key people in SPL, designers in SPL, and the directors in SPL as well, along with Mr. Sharkey and the Alliance agreeing to come on board and give people the right resource and the right backing. So that's really what it took. I think to answer Malcolm's question, you know, to do that in every project, it took a hell of a lot of time. You know, a lot of 18-hour days worked over those few weeks. So, you know, you really need to resource a certain element of that as well to get something to work like that. So.
Sure. And was there any challenges with the datum or the grid, etc., for the surveys? You know, track and civils tying up together, or the two systems managed to kind of speak to each other? From the design point of view, when we're doing survey, was that?
We passed information backwards and forwards. A good example of that was probably the designers for SPL. They have an in-house design capability. They commented on the Covey reinstatement proposal for the Site 3, and they added their own design proposal for round about the overhead line masts, and that got adopted into a single design that went on one set of drawings. So that was really excellent. Sure. The other side of it is, no matter how much communication you have, we still ended up with a debate about, I think it was 40 mil difference in the handover level of Site 1 between QTS to the Rail Alliance. They said we were 40 mil too high, and QTS said we were 40 mil too low. So there's always something comes up.
Absolutely. I think in the grand scheme of things, it's done pretty well. Doing pretty well. A note from Neil Hamilton. Again, commending the presentation, a great presentation. He said you mentioned a number of historic compromises addressed during the works, multiple troughing routes, locks in the wrong place, substandard electrical clearances, etc. He's asking, do you think we'll see less compromise going forward under the banner of building back better type of thing? So one for the future. Any thoughts at all from yourself, or Stephen or Martin, on that?
I'm just wondering why Neil's asking me that one. He knows the answer better than I do, I suspect. So.
It's a strange question, because this is the difference between working for track renewals under capital delivery and capital delivery projects themselves. Under track renewals, we would not have been allowed to leave the track with substandard clearances at an overbridge. We wouldn't have got we wouldn't have got approval. You know, it wouldn't have got to an AFC design, because you wouldn't have got it past the RAM team. So it's strange that, you know, we built the E&G, wired it up with substandard bridge clearances, you know, with sites saying no tamping here. This is a really bad problem, because you've left a maintenance problem. How does maintenance maintain that track under that bridge if you can't tamp it? So I would say yes, there's lots to be done. I think we've got standards there, and I think the projects have got to work to those standards, even when it gets difficult to do. You know, we should have lowered the track, or when we were doing electrification works, and it's relatively straightforward to do.
Yeah, and I suppose electrical clearance were one of these things about, you know, the multiple trophons, the looks, everything that. I think it stems back to that kind of whole system approach. What does it mean for the system? And sometimes certain disciplines have got a focus to deliver an element of work, and that's what they need to do. But to start unpicking multiple different disciplines over the years is very difficult, and indeed very expensive, and it sometimes takes away the business case for doing that smaller element. So I suppose it's a balance between that. But yeah, good point, Martin. Good point. I think we are. I think we're all done on questions on the chat forum. If anyone's still on the call and wants to just use a mic, you can. The little red symbol on your screen next to your mic, if you press that, you'll take yourself off mute. Feel free to identify yourself and ask a question to Martin or Stephen before we end. If anyone has any questions you want to ask verbally, I'll just give it a minute. It looks like we've probably managed to, you'll be glad to know, answer all the questions. And that we've got a couple of other comments just from Mark and Tom Wilson. Again, congratulating you both for an excellent presentation. If there's no questions from the floor, if I could just give a quick vote of thanks, please. So the presentation tonight, gents, really interesting, and so good to be a local issue that is literally on our doorstep. The flood itself, the scale of that flood, the 1 in 240 years, 40 millimeters in 1 hour, it just is something unbelievable. You know, it's and that the power of that water, if you've never seen anything like that, you know, the energy within that, and being able to take 9 meters of a railway, it used the term wiped out, and I think that's absolutely spot on. You know, it just, whatever's in its way, it will get taken away. One of the key points, I suppose, was identifying that it wasn't just a geotechnical problem, but it was a systems issue, and it needed everyone to get involved in that to make that thing work. And having to give that initial estimate of, you know, a couple of months, 8 or 10 weeks or something, I'm sure was a difficult thing to say. But once people saw the scale of that event, it was probably a little bit easier to try and do that. And indeed, some of the press releases by Network Rail were able to show the photographs to show the passengers, you know, just what a big a challenge that was. The practical challenges was of trying to achieve a bench cut face, you know, which when you're sitting in a drawing office and you're showing what you want to do, and actually, but when you're out in the ground, actually achieving that, it's pretty difficult sometimes. And I admire the honesty of, you know, how you kind of came around that. I think there was a site one, the aerial view, there was an aerial shot of the excavation, and when you see it on that scale, it is quite literally a whole new meaning to a deep dig. Martin, you'll be used to maybe doing you know, 650 mil or something like that, but 9 meters, I suppose, is something that's probably your personal best, I'm sure, for excavations. And the new kit, the MFS, the bus wagons type of thing that were used, they're pretty complex piece of kit actually, you know, mechanical engineering, and it's good to see they are being used by the regions and the routes itself and that. And indeed the DTS as well, you know, again, getting that 60 mile an hour if you're in an over 9 meters dig is pretty good achievement. So timescale wise, the 40 days, you know, that quite a big challenge that, and indeed, you know, having to actually get that back a week earlier than originally anticipated, I'm sure that was not so well heard when that challenge was put into the pot as well. But you came up to the bar and were able to deliver that. So well done for that. And that during that tight schedule, you still managed to follow the process, the procedures, you know, for engineering, hazard management, risk management, and that. So that, you know, it's admirable you've still been able to keep that together. That's a key part when you're delivering that type of thing. It's easy to lose focus in a kind of emergency style situation, but you were able still to comply with that. The final photographs and the cab ride video as well, you know, the drivers will fly through there and you would never, if they hadn't seen the photographs, never had any idea of that impression of the devastation that actually happened there. So which shows that you've done an ideal job. So well done. And I suppose finally the lessons learned, you know, there's always something you can get better. So the project's been mature enough to go through that process and then see what can we do if we're using that type of recovery style process again, or how we work together in different teams. And I suppose the final lessons learned is if your MFS wagon shuts down, phone up Network Rail IT and they'll tell you just to turn it off and turn it back on and see it'll probably work, and that seemed to work. So so excellent presentation, guys, and well done for handling the technical issues at the beginning and keeping it together and that. You've done brilliantly doing that. If I could ask the audience, I'm going to try and unmute everyone, if that works. If I could ask the audience to show their appreciation in the normal manner, to say to the guys for an excellent presentation. Well done, guys. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers, gentlemen. So just a quick thing before we go. I forgot to say at the beginning, our last month's meeting was actually their AGM and our 2021 technical quiz, which was very close, but won by Gordon McRae.
Yay!
Well
Russell,
done, Mr. McRae.
Russell, we could have kept that over to next month and got people back again. I mean, how many people? We had 44 people, so I mean, if you hadn't actually said that, we might have rolled that over to next month.
Absolutely. So well done, Gash, for that. And next month's meeting, just a final one, is Rob Lacey. He's a principal engineer for Tracking S&C in Milton Keynes, and he is delivering the presentation titled Mind the Gap, Gauging Improvements. So it's a Wednesday again. We've moved to the Wednesday date of the first Wednesday in the month, so Wednesday the 3rd of March. So thanks again to Martin and Stephen for an excellent presentation, and thanks to the rest of the audience tonight for dialing in, and we hope to see you next month, if not before. And have a safe night, everyone. Stay well, and we'll hopefully see you next month. Thanks again.
Cheers, Russell. Thanks.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thanks again. Are you still on, Mark?
I'm still on, yes.
All right.
Brilliant. Yeah, I found my notes at the end there, so I stuck them on. So I think some people managed to probably sort of see them because I addressed that to everyone. Because what I should have, I thought I probably should have a speech about it before coming on, but I think they're John Edgley's pushing for sort of competencies for people within the sort of rail industry. I think he's trying to make it a sort of a bigger deal than what it is just now.
Okay, yeah.
There's a few courses coming up, so I think I spoke to Martin because I know that the guys in RSA have been on the S&C refurb courses, so I think there's about 3 of them coming up this year. So I might try
okay.
one of those. Still an increase in, there's an electrification diploma pilot supposed to be starting. So as the PWI sort of lining itself with the over OLE community, then I think that's probably. So we'll see how he gets on with that, seeing as he's he's done such a good job in the what do you call it, the other stuff. So there's increase in professional members. So that's continuing.
Mark, sorry, can I just interrupt? Is there anything else, Russell? I'll just bail out.
I think Mark's giving them the lowdown, but Stephen, so brilliant. Thank you very much, Stephen. Cheers.
Finish your committee discussions.
I was going to, Martin's away, but I was going to ask him, was that his dog that was barking? I think it was his dog that was barking.
I think it must have been, yeah. It was. I was like, pick up with it.
Excellent. I really appreciate that, Stephen. Thanks very much for that. And
all right, great.
And
sorry about the technical bits at the beginning.
No, absolutely no. You did an admirable way to manage that and everything. So well done with that. Have yourself a little gin and tonic now to relax.
Yeah.